I should have known something was wrong the moment I saw her at the H.O.A. meeting. Victoria Chen sat at the head of the mahogany conference table in the community center, her designer suit perfectly pressed, her dark hair swept into an immaculate bun. She had the kind of polished appearance that belonged in a corporate boardroom, not presiding over a suburban neighborhood association. But there she was, newly elected H.O.A. president, smiling with practiced warmth as she welcomed everyone to her first official meeting. Welcome, neighbors. I am so thrilled to serve this wonderful community. Together, we will make Riverside Estates the most pristine, most valuable neighborhood in the entire county. I had moved to Riverside Estates 6 months earlier, drawn by the quiet streets and well-maintained homes. As a patent attorney who worked primarily from my home office, I valued peace and privacy. The H.O.A. seemed reasonable enough during my research. Standard rules about lawn maintenance and exterior paint colors. Nothing I could not handle. Victoria had moved in around the same time I did, into the largest house on Magnolia Drive. Within 3 months, she had somehow gotten herself elected H.O.A. president. I voted for the other candidate, a retired teacher who seemed sensible and kind. But Victoria had campaigned door-to-door with homemade cookies and promises of protecting property values. She won by a landslide. The first few weeks were fine. Then the letters started arriving. The initial violation notice appeared in my mailbox on a Tuesday morning. The infraction? My garbage bins were visible from the street for approximately 45 minutes past the designated collection time. The fine was $50. I checked the H.O.A. bylaws, which specified bins must be removed by 7 p.m. on collection day. My bins had been retrieved at 6:15 p.m., well within the time frame. I had security camera footage to prove it. I attended the next H.O.A. meeting to dispute the fine. Victoria listened to my explanation with a sympathetic expression, nodding along as I presented my evidence. Then she pulled out her own photographs, time-stamped at 7:03 p.m., clearly showing my bins still at the curb. I understand your security cameras show an earlier time, but as you can see from my documentation, the bins were still visible after the deadline. Perhaps your camera's timestamp is incorrect? Regardless, the rules are the rules. I am sure you understand we cannot make exceptions, or soon everyone will want one. I examined her photos more carefully. The shadows were wrong. The angle suggested they had been taken much earlier in the day, but the metadata had been altered. She had doctored the evidence. I opened my mouth to point this out, then caught the gleam in her eye. She wanted me to challenge her. She was hoping I would make a scene. If you enjoyed this story so far, I would love it if you could take just a second to hit that like button and subscribe to Karen Eat World. Your support helps me bring you more wild stories of justice and karma. Now, back to Victoria. I paid the $50 fine. It was easier than fighting, or so I thought. 2 weeks later, another notice. My front door wreath violated the approved decor guidelines by being 3 inches larger than the maximum permitted diameter. Fine, $75. I measured the wreath. It was exactly the approved size. I measured every wreath on my street. 3 were larger than mine, including the enormous one on Victoria's own front door. I took photographs and submitted a formal complaint. At the next meeting, Victoria smiled sweetly and explained that the other wreaths had been pre-approved as seasonal traditional decorations under a grandfather clause. Mine, being a modern design, required specific approval, which I had not obtained. She offered to waive the fine if I removed the wreath immediately. I removed the wreath. The harassment escalated. My mailbox was 2 inches too close to the sidewalk. My garden gnome was whimsical decor, not permitted in front yards. My car, a perfectly reasonable sedan, was parked at a non-optimal angle in my own driveway. Each violation came with increasing fines and Victoria's saccharine concern about my inability to follow simple community standards. I tried reasoning with her privately. I knocked on her door one Saturday morning, bringing fresh muffins as a peace offering. She invited me in, served coffee in delicate china cups, and listened attentively as I explained that I wanted to be a good neighbor and follow all reasonable rules. "Oh, I completely understand your frustration. You know, these rules can seem so picky, but they exist for a reason. Property values, you see. I have noticed you work from home. That must be nice. So much flexibility. What is it you do exactly?" I told her I was a patent attorney specializing in intellectual property and real estate law. Something flickered across her face, too quick to identify. Interest? Concern? She recovered immediately, smiling wider. How fascinating. Well, I am sure someone with your legal expertise appreciates the importance of following established guidelines. Perhaps you just need to read the bylaws more carefully. I find most people's violations stem from simple oversights. She was enjoying this. Every fine, every notice, every moment of my irritation fed something in her. I realized with cold clarity that my professional background had not intimidated her. It had made me a more satisfying target. I went home and read every single page of the H.O.A. bylaws, covenants, and restrictions. All 67 pages. Then I researched Victoria Chen. What I found was illuminating. She had been an assistant manager at a mid-sized retail company before moving to Riverside Estates. No executive position, no major accomplishments. Her social media was a carefully curated highlight reel of her beautiful home, her designer clothes, her H.O.A. presidency. She posted constantly about leadership and community standards and excellence. The comments were disabled. More interesting was what I found in public records. Victoria's house was mortgaged to the absolute limit. She drove a leased luxury car. Her husband, whom I had never seen, worked as a regional sales manager for a pharmaceutical company. They looked wealthy, but the financials told a different story. They were house poor, living paycheck to paycheck while maintaining an elaborate facade. The H.O.A. presidency gave Victoria something money could not buy: power. The ability to make demands and have them obeyed. The authority to judge and punish. She had probably spent years taking orders in her retail job, dealing with difficult customers and condescending supervisors. Now she was in charge, and she was going to make everyone feel it. Understanding her motivations did not stop the violation notices. They arrived weekly now, sometimes twice a week. My lawn was unevenly trimmed. My house numbers were fading and must be replaced with approved fonts. My porch light was excessively bright and disturbing neighbors, even though it was the same wattage as every other porch light on the street. The fines totaled over $800. I paid every single one without complaint, and I began making plans. My practice specialized in a particular niche of real estate law involving property easements, deed restrictions, and covenant enforcement. I had spent 15 years helping clients navigate complex property disputes, often finding creative solutions within existing legal frameworks. I understood how to read the fine print, how to identify loopholes, and most importantly, how to use rules as weapons. I started with a comprehensive survey of Riverside Estates. The neighborhood consisted of 240 homes across 12 streets, all governed by the same H.O.A. I obtained copies of every property deed, every easement, every covenant filed with the county. I reviewed the H.O.A.'s articles of incorporation, its bylaws, its amendment history. I attended every meeting, taking detailed notes. Victoria's violations continued. She seemed to be inventing new rules specifically for me. My doormat was excessively worn. My garden hose was improperly stored, despite being on a hose reel specifically designed for storage. She cited me for having unauthorized wildlife feeding when birds visited the flowers in my garden. At one particularly memorable meeting, she spent 10 minutes explaining to the entire assembly why my choice of mulch color was aesthetically inconsistent with neighborhood standards. Other residents looked uncomfortable. A few whispered sympathetically afterward, but no one challenged her. Victoria had successfully created an atmosphere of fear and compliance. I know these rules might seem strict, but someone has to maintain standards. If we let one person slide, soon the entire neighborhood will look like a junkyard. I am sure our attorney neighbor understands the importance of precedent. She looked directly at me when she said it, her smile never wavering. The room was silent. That evening, I made a phone call to an old friend from law school. Marcus had gone into municipal law and now worked for the county planning department. We had lunch the following week, during which I asked several theoretical questions about deed restrictions, property subdivisions, and county ordinances. Marcus was happy to help, especially when I mentioned I might have some pro bono work available for his favorite charity. The next piece of my plan required a different kind of research. I began walking the neighborhood regularly, always with my phone, documenting everything. I photographed every house, every yard, every decorative element. I noted which residents had oversized wreaths, unauthorized garden decorations, mailboxes at improper angles, cars parked at non-optimal positions. I discovered that approximately 90% of the homes in Riverside Estates were in violation of at least one H.O.A. rule. Victoria simply chose not to enforce them equally. More interesting were the violations at Victoria's own property. Her ornate mailbox exceeded maximum permitted size by 6 inches. Her decorative shutters were a non-approved color, a shade of blue-gray not on the official palette. Her lawn sprinkler system had a small leak that created standing water on the sidewalk, a clear violation of maintenance standards. Her garbage bins, I observed, were frequently left out past the deadline. I documented everything meticulously, with dated photographs and detailed notes. Then I filed formal complaints for each violation. Victoria's response was swift. She rejected every complaint, citing various technicalities and exceptions. Her mailbox was historic grandfather decor. Her shutters had been pre-approved by the previous board. The sprinkler leak was scheduled for repair. The garbage bins were necessarily delayed due to H.O.A. presidential duties. She then retaliated with a flurry of new violations against me. I was cited for having an unauthorized doorbell, because I had replaced my broken doorbell with a smart video doorbell. The bylaws she referenced required prior approval for all exterior electronic devices, a rule so vague it could apply to virtually anything. The fine was $250. I paid it the next day, because I had found something interesting in my research. A loophole so obvious, so exploitable, that I was amazed Victoria had not seen it coming. But then, she was not a lawyer. She was a bully with a gavel, and just enough authority to make people miserable. She understood power, but she did not understand the law. The H.O.A. bylaws contained a standard provision allowing property owners to petition for covenant modifications with a 60% approval vote. Seemed reasonable, democratic even. But there was another provision, buried in the Articles of Incorporation, that had far more interesting implications. Any property owner could propose amendments to the H.O.A. bylaws at any properly noticed meeting. If the amendment received a majority vote of attending members, it would pass immediately. The catch? The bylaws defined a quorum as 20% of property owners or their designated proxies. Riverside Estates had 240 homes. 20% was 40 properties. Most H.O.A. meetings attracted 15 to 20 attendees. Victoria had maintained power, because most residents could not be bothered to show up. They paid their dues, followed the basic rules, and ignored the meetings. I began attending neighborhood block parties and casual gatherings. I introduced myself properly to residents I had only waved to before. I was friendly, helpful, and most importantly, I listened. People loved to complain about the H.O.A., about Victoria's arbitrary enforcement, about the constant fines, about the fear of accidentally violating some obscure rule. I did not criticize Victoria directly. I simply asked questions and let people share their frustrations. By the end of summer, I had built a substantial network of disgruntled neighbors, all of whom felt powerless against the H.O.A. president's tyranny. In September, Victoria issued her most audacious violation yet. She cited me for unauthorized business operations in my home. According to a bylaw I had somehow missed, all home-based businesses required special approval from the H.O.A. board. My law practice, conducted entirely from my home office, was an illegal business operation. The fine was $500, plus an additional $100 per week until I obtained proper approval or ceased operations. She was literally trying to shut down my livelihood. I requested a hearing before the full H.O.A. board. Victoria agreed, scheduling it for the next monthly meeting. She looked delighted at the prospect of publicly humiliating me. I spent the next 3 weeks preparing. Not for the hearing, that was irrelevant. Victoria controlled the board. She would rule against me regardless of my arguments. No, I was preparing for what would happen after. I drafted a series of bylaw amendments. Reasonable, sensible changes that addressed the most common complaints. Modifications to the approval process for home-based businesses. Clearer guidelines for decorations and exterior modifications. Equal enforcement standards requiring the president to document why violations were cited for some properties but not others. Term limits for H.O.A. officers. Each amendment was carefully worded to sound fair and balanced while systematically stripping power from the H.O.A. presidency. I had the documents reviewed by 2 other attorneys specializing in property law. They were airtight. Then I began collecting proxies. I visited every neighbor who had complained about Victoria. I explained that I was proposing some amendments to make the H.O.A. more fair and transparent. Would they be willing to sign a proxy allowing me to vote on their behalf if they could not attend the meeting? Most people signed immediately. A few wanted to read the amendments first. I provided copies, and they signed too. By the time the meeting arrived, I had proxies from 108 property owners. More than enough to pass any amendment I proposed. The hearing was exactly as I expected. Victoria sat at the head of the table, flanked by her board members, all of whom she had personally selected. I presented my case. My law practice was conducted entirely online and by phone, generated no traffic, created no disturbance, and was no different from the dozens of other residents who worked remotely from home. Victoria listened with exaggerated patience, then explained why I was wrong. The bylaw was clear. Home-based businesses required approval. I had not sought approval. Therefore, I was in violation. The board voted unanimously to uphold the fine and require me to cease operations within 30 days or face escalating penalties. I am sorry it has come to this, but rules exist for everyone, even attorneys. The decision is final. She looked triumphant. Several residents in the audience looked sympathetic but helpless. This was the moment Victoria loved most, the moment her authority was absolute and unchallengeable. I stood up. Thank you for your decision. In that case, I would like to propose several amendments to the H.O.A. bylaws under Article 7, Section 3 of the Articles of Incorporation. I have the required signatures for a quorum and formal proposals in writing. I placed a stack of documents on the table. Victoria's smile faltered slightly. She picked up the papers, scanning them quickly. This is highly irregular. These amendments require proper notice and review. We cannot simply vote on major changes without adequate preparation. I smiled politely. Actually, according to Article 7, Section 3, any amendment properly proposed at a notice meeting may be voted upon immediately, provided a quorum is present. This meeting was properly noticed. I have proxies from 108 property owners, well above the required 20% quorum. The proposals are in writing as required. Everything is entirely procedural. Her face went pale. She began reading the amendments more carefully, her expression shifting from confusion to anger to something resembling panic. The First Amendment established clear guidelines for home-based businesses, essentially legalizing any quiet, low-traffic professional work conducted from a residence. The Second created an enforcement transparency requirement, mandating that all violations be documented with photographic evidence and that any property cited for a violation must be proven to be in violation while similar properties nearby were not. The Third established term limits. No person could serve as H.O.A. president for more than 2 consecutive one-year terms. The Fourth Amendment was my masterpiece. It required the H.O.A. president's primary residence to be in exemplary compliance with all covenants, rules, and restrictions, serving as a model for the community. Any violation of any bylaw by the president's property would result in immediate removal from office and a one-year ban from serving in any H.O.A. capacity. I had photographs, dated, time-stamped, meticulously documented photographs of every violation at Victoria's property. The oversized mailbox, the non-approved shutter color, the sprinkler leak, the garbage bins left out past deadline on multiple occasions, the lawn area that exceeded maximum permitted height by half an inch, the doormat that was technically a non-approved pattern. Victoria tried to argue. She called the amendments punitive and targeted. She insisted they required more study. She demanded a delay for proper review. Her voice, usually so controlled and sweet, had taken on a sharp, desperate edge. I called for a vote on each amendment. With my 108 proxies plus the 23 residents actually present, I had 131 votes. Victoria had her 4 board members. The math was not complicated. The amendments passed unanimously, or near enough. Victoria sat frozen, her perfect composure shattered. She understood exactly what had happened but seemed unable to process it fully. These amendments take effect immediately upon passage, correct? I asked mildly. One of the board members, a retired accountant named George, who had always seemed uncomfortable with Victoria's tactics, nodded slowly. That is correct. Article 7 specifies immediate implementation, unless otherwise stated in the amendment language. I pulled out another folder. This one contained all my documented violations of Victoria's property, formatted as official H.O.A. complaints, dated and signed. In that case, I am filing formal violations against the H.O.A. president's property. As per the newly passed amendment, these violations require immediate investigation and, if substantiated, result in removal from office. Victoria finally found her voice. This is absurd. This is a witch hunt. You cannot just change the rules to target me specifically. I did not change the rules. 131 property owners changed the rules through proper democratic process. And I am not targeting you specifically. I am simply requesting that the H.O.A. president be held to the same standard she has enforced against everyone else. You have always said the rules are the rules, and we cannot make exceptions. I completely agree. She looked around the room, searching for support. A few people would not meet her eyes. Others were openly smiling. George cleared his throat. Victoria, I think we need to examine these complaints. If they are accurate, then under the new amendment, We have no choice but to follow procedure." She stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Fine. Investigate. You will find that every single one of those so-called violations is either covered under existing exceptions or completely fabricated. I have run this H.O.A. with integrity and dedication, and I will not be pushed out by some vindictive, petty man who cannot handle being held accountable." The meeting dissolved into chaos. Victoria stormed out, her heels clicking sharply on the tile floor. Several residents approached me afterward, some to shake my hand, others to ask questions about the new amendments. For a moment, I saw it all on her face. The shock, the rage, the humiliation, the full, crushing understanding that she had not just lost her position. She had lost her purpose, her identity, the one thing that made her feel powerful and important. And it had all been taken away using her own rules, her own beloved bylaws, her own insistence on rigid enforcement. She had been defeated not through anger or violence or dramatic confrontation, but through the same bureaucratic mechanisms she had wielded so gleefully against others. The rules were the rules, and I had simply played the game better than she had. Her expression crumpled. Then she turned away, disappearing into the house without another glance. If you made it to the end of this wild story, thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed watching Karma catch up to Victoria, please hit that like button and subscribe to Karen E World for more stories of entitled people getting exactly what they deserve. Your support means everything and helps me keep bringing you these satisfying tales of justice. Until next time.